Welcome back, everybody. We are still 21 months from the Iowa caucus and 31 months from the presidential election, but that hasn't stopped the Republican frontrunners and a number of big money backers from holding their own primaries. The latest was this weekend's Freedom Summit in New Hampshire, put on by Citizens United and the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity.
If you want to be consistent, if you want to grow the movement, we cannot be the party of fat cats, rich people, and Wall Street.
My gosh, I'm beginning to think that there's more freedom in North Korea sometimes than there is in the United States.
The American people, I believe, are rising up. They're fed up with Washington. They're fed up with career politicians in both parties.
Joining me now, NBC News' Casey Hunt, who's in New Hampshire for that summit, and Avik Roy, policy advisor for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign and a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Thank you both for joining today. Casey, I'm going to start with you. One important question. How much more free is North Korea than the United States?
I don't know, but I want to ask Dennis
lot more
Rodman
free, a little
about
more
it.
free?
I mean, this, the rhetoric was just sort of
it's a beautiful thing.
Cranked up
Yeah.
at this particular summit. And there is a certain degree of irony. You showed also Rand Paul talking about Wall Street fat cats. I mean, this was, a summit organized by Americans for Prosperity, which is funded in large part by the Koch brothers and this sort of small group of donors. If anything, it's a symbol of the money that's sloshing around in politics.
And both sides have to contend with that reputation, right, Avik? Because you see big money coming into these elections in the wake of Citizens United and a number of other rulings that are sort of eroding the restraints on the purse strings.
Yeah, I think both parties have their billionaire corporate backers, George Soros, to name one example. But actually, I think AFP
But is this a phenomenon that's happening more prominently with Republicans?
I don't think so, and I think AFP actually gets a bad rap. Yes, the Kochs fund it, but the energy really is in the grassroots. I mean, you see the people cheering there in the stands. Those are people who agree with what those candidates are saying. So, I mean, the Americans for Prosperity really does reflect what the conservative base actually wants.
Even framing it as a positive, though, Casey, what do you think in response to that question? Have the Democrats gotten their act together, if you will, on lining up big donors? It seems, for better or worse, that's going to be a necessity going into the next election cycle.
I think Democrats who are focused on trying to keep the Senate together feel like there's a lack of billionaire or millionaire donors supporting them. I mean, I don't even think that, in private conversations, they don't frame it as, oh, this is something we're ideologically against. They frame it as, we really need somebody to come in and counter. I mean, Americans for Prosperity in particular is airing these anti-Obamacare ads in all of these key states, pouring millions and millions of dollars, $10 million already in North Carolina, all by itself. There is no Democratic group on the air fighting that fight to a draw, which is really what they need right now, so that their candidates can kind of go about their campaigns while at least the air war is being neutralized.
Avik, do you think a front-runner emerged out of this last weekend on the summit?
Not really. And actually, what I think is so interesting is the people who were there, the 2016 contenders who were there, were the ones who were least likely to win the nomination. I think this year, or 2016, this cycle, there's the biggest gap, in my recollection, between what the base wants in a Republican nominee and the type of nominee that would win a general election. I think history shows us the base usually loses those arguments.
And that's something that hurts the Republican Party sometimes, right? That it's such a radicalizing process just to get through the primary.
And then the base gets disaffected, they don't turn out.
So what do you think the answer is, Casey?
Well, if you think about New Hampshire in particular, I mean, this is a state where we would think that a moderate or a maverick type of candidate might be able to win. I mean, the one thing I would draw out of it in particular...
Scott Brown, for instance?
Well, Scott Brown is from neighboring Massachusetts, and they have this very flattering nickname in New Hampshire for people across the border of Massachusetts. I mean, there's a little bit of animosity there.
Nobody knows.
But, I think that the person to watch in New Hampshire right now is Rand Paul. And I think that was very visible at this summit. There were people standing in the back waiting to watch him speak. He did sort of a tour of the state. He did several fundraisers. They were pretty well attended. And he has an organization there that's left over from when his father ran for president. One thing that people that have supported Paul family members have been very effective at doing is sort of taking over party infrastructure. They did a little bit of it in Iowa, too. And his libertarian message resonates in this live free or die state in a way that an evangelical message from a Mike Huckabee or a Ted Cruz might not as much.
Well, let's talk about another big candidate who is absent there, Jeb Bush. What do you think that signals, Avik, for his potential candidacy?
Well, he hasn't been going to these events in general. He's been trying to keep a relatively low profile. Obviously, the press is continuing to follow what he says and does. But he said, and I take him at his word, that he's going to wait until the end of this year before he decides whether to jump in or not. But clearly the signals seem to be that he's considering it very seriously.
What about the absence of Chris Christie, Casey?
Chris Christie was not even invited, organizers told me. I mean, he is not, I don't think, somebody that the base feels like they can embrace at this point, or certainly not the base that was represented in New Hampshire. I think the most notable thing that I saw over the weekend was, of course, Donald Trump raised Jeb Bush's comments about immigration being an act of love, and it drew boos from the audience. I mean, they were clearly not excited to hear about him.
Hold that thought, both of you, because we have more Trump coming up next. All right, both of you stick around. Casey and Avik are going to weigh in on our heroes and zeros today. One is from Boston and the other is Donald Trump. Can you guess which is which? That's all ahead. Now, to today's zero. Someone who is no stranger to saying just the right thing to whip up the news cycle. At Saturday's Freedom Summit in New Hampshire, Donald Trump did just that, earning cheers for his comments about Obamacare and the economy. But he was met with some boos when he mentioned Jeb Bush and immigration. Take a listen.
You know, I heard Jeb Bush the other day, and he was talking about people that come into this country illegally, they do it for love. And I said, say it again. I didn't get, that's one I've never heard of before. I've heard a lot. I've heard money, I've heard this, I've heard sex, I've heard everything. The one thing I never heard of was love. I understand what he's saying, but, you know, it's out there.
The one thing he never heard of is love. When former Governor Bush made those comments, we labeled him a hero for having the courage for his convictions. You give Donald Trump the opposite for speaking out in criticism of a fellow Republican who spoke his mind. We're back with our panel to react. Casey, what's the reaction been? You were out there. How's the Republican Party rolling with those particular comments from Trump?
Well, Trump sure does know how to stir up a little
Doesn't he, though?
News storm, as you will. I think that it highlighted, though, what Jeb Bush's issues are going to be with the base of the party. The immigration approach is one. It's something that has drawn a lot of opposition from the base. Rand Paul was asked in an avail over the weekend to weigh in on that. He defended Bush, but not particularly aggressively. The other thing I would say about Jeb Bush is that the biggest applause line at the summit over the weekend was about Common Core. They want to repeal the Common Core curriculum, and that's something that Jeb Bush has really stepped out on, and is another thing that's going to get him in trouble with the base if he decides to run.
So these are things that make him more of a moderately appealing candidate, but could signal disaster with the hardliners. What do you think, Avik? Is this preview of the kind of blowback he'll get from the far right?
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting if you compare Jeb Bush to Marco Rubio. So Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush actually agree on much of the policy issues, but Marco Rubio has stepped back in face of this incredibly strong opposition from the base, whereas Jeb Bush is just saying, look, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how he does. If he does manage to do well in the primaries despite having that resistance, it's going to be pretty impressive.
All right, well, he's up against a lot, and I think regardless of your party politics, we all like candor and directness, and that seems to be what he's showing. All right, thank you for your own candor and directness. We'll have you back for more of that. That was fun.